as part of their contract. And essentially, the idea is you can get a general home inspection and just know that it is not technically exhaustive, or you can get an exhaustive inspection, and it might include permit history, construction, uh, using specialized trades, geotechnical, architectural, whatever it might be. And then for those additional services, there would be an additional cost. And the idea being that if you dive into more technically exhaustive aspects of the inspection, you should then expect to charge more for those things. Also, in doing my research, I found on the South Charlotte Inspection Services, they did a good job of sort of putting it out there. So they say they're not going to tear things apart. That would be technically exhaustive, and that's not what this is. But if you want that, we can do it. They usually cost a lot of money. Their opinion is they're usually not necessary in a real estate transaction. And then it goes on to just describe what a technical exhaustive inspection might be. On the Working Real Estate website, and this was also an article in their monthly or quarterly magazine, um, they were making the case for the fact that inspectors are already not limiting themselves to an inspection that is not technically exhaustive. And by that, they mean that when you start operating systems, flushing toilets, testing the HVAC system, if you pull out a moisture meter or an infrared camera or even a thermometer, you're now moving past just a purely visual inspection, right? The idea with just a purely visual inspection is you should be able to walk through the house without even having a flashlight and have it conform to the standard. Now, I'm not recommending that you do that. And then they go on to talk about the standard of care is regardless of how many times you say, I'm not inspecting this, I'm not inspecting that, you do have a responsibility to dig a little bit deeper and not just hide behind the standard. One thing to keep in mind is there was a case in Tennessee where um, the clients bought a house through a relocation company. Uh, they had an inspection that the relocation company arranged for. And when they moved in, they discovered they had a problem with their chimney flue. And their lawyer was able to successfully demonstrate that the inspector had gone beyond his limitation of technically exhaustive because he had opened the electric panel, he had engaged the garage door opener, he put dye in the plumbing system, and therefore he was able to establish that the inspector was negligent because by disclaiming that he's not technically exhaustive in all areas and then actually going in and being more technical, he then opened himself up for a negligence claim, and the court actually supported that. The the main beef, the main part of the case was whether or not the client could actually sue the real estate relocation company because they're sort of like a third party to it. That they ended up not buying the property from the Coldwell Banker listing agent. They bought it from the real estate relocation services. In the end, the caveat is you're already opening yourself up to exposure just by being a home inspector. And if you're doing your due diligence and you're expanding on what the limitations of the standards are, you could then be interpreted as having sort of negated that because you've demonstrated that you go beyond the standard in some cases, but maybe not in others. All that is to say, when I'm advocating that you consider broadening your inspections and trying to be a more technically exhaustive inspector, means don't worry about your exposure because you're already exposed. And if you just continue to do a good job, you shouldn't have to worry about that. So in my uh, contract inspection agreement, I have the same standard information I suppose most of you do as well, where it says, I'm not taking stuff apart, I'm not opening up walls. This is not technically exhaustive, no warranty, no guarantee. You should have people look at things. And even though I say that in my contract, it doesn't mean I can't do those things. And that when I do, it's for a specific intent. Technically exhaustive inspections, in my opinion, should include detached structures. So we're required to inspect garages, but if there's other buildings, we're not required to inspect them. I think you should inspect them. Um, Fences, except for where they attach to the house, I think you should inspect the perimeter as best you can. Clients often want to know, where their pets get out, where their children get out, are there repairs that are needed to the fences? I guess this would be a good point to stop and say that the evolution of my inspection report and the reason I provide a technically exhaustive inspection is because over time I would get feedback from clients, sometimes in the form of a complaint, where they would say, oh, I wish I would have known that my fence needed to be repaired in these locations, because I could have then planned for it, or I might have asked the seller for it. Um, Similarly, I try and open and close every door and window in the house. I try and test every outlet that I can get to. I try and determine which light switches do what. And I do spend a fair amount of time, making sure that 3 and 4-way circuits are working properly, trying to figure out how the floodlights are operated, uh, how the landscape lighting is operated, mainly so that my client, when they move in, they don't call and say, hey, do you know how this works? And by trying to be technically exhaustive, I give them a roadmap to at least being able to figure it out, or specifically telling them, this is how you operate this. This is how you operate this. This is where this is located. And so, by that same token, I think home inspectors should inspect pools. I think you should figure out how the landscape lighting works. I think you should turn it on, see if it is functional, uh, test timers, reset them when necessary, find the light switch that operates them. We inspect irrigation systems. And when I say we inspect irrigation systems, sometimes it's as simple as, here's where the irrigation valve is, here's where the control monitor is, it has a rain sensor, um, it has, these many zones, whatever information I can gather from just what's visible, I'm going to include in my report. But I'm also going to have the caveat of, and this should be winterized or de-winterized by this point, or it has been winterized, and so a full evaluation wasn't possible. So I'm not opening myself up to saying, oh, the irrigation system works, as much as I'm saying, hey, you have an irrigation system. Here's the components of it. Here's what you need to know about how to operate it. And, I would start with the contractor's sticker that's on there, because if they've worked on it most recently, they want you to call them back. We will operate irrigation systems, not all the time. We'll operate them if we have some observations about zones that either aren't functioning or there appears to be oversaturation. And on some systems, we'll operate it because the client says, hey, I want to make sure it works. The last system I had, didn't work. We're not required to inspect outdoor cooking appliances. At least in the properties that I inspect, they can be pretty elaborate. These outdoor kitchens can have hoods, can have multiple grilling surfaces and fuels. And I think it's doing your client a short service by disclaiming, any sort of outdoor kitchen. Um, you need to include as much as you can of the things that the client is going to find don't work. We're not required to ignite or extinguish fires, pilot lights, burners. If a house has a gas log set and it's off, I'm going to try and light it. And if I can do it readily, I'll do that, and I'll return it to the position it was in when I found it. But I'll also include an explanation of how to do that, with some links on how to figure out how to operate their system. I'm not going to be exhaustive in getting it to work. I'm going to try it a couple of times. I might use a hand torch. I might use the sparker, but I'm going to at least try and establish, does this thing work or not? Um, Depending on the job, and this is mostly with new construction or renovation work, I will do permit searches. I will try and find out, what the complaints have been and what the investigation of the permit services have been. I'll take a look at the number of different permits they might have, not to really call anything out, but just to kind of be aware of, is this renovation on the up and up? Was it include everything it's supposed to have? If it doesn't, that's a little bit of a red flag of where to look for additional deficiencies. Decorative items, I mainly focus on new construction and renovation work. So if I'm inspecting an existing house that's turned over multiple times over the years, I'm not really going to talk about decorative items unless it's something that the client really wants to know, like how many rooms do I need to refinish, or if it's something that's really egregious that should be brought to their attention. But if it's just general sort of touch up and paint, I'm not going to talk about that. But in my new construction and renovation work, I use blue tape. I write on the tape and leave it in place. I write descriptions in my report. And the way I handle that is if I'm identifying multiple defects of the same type on the same surface, I'm not going to mark every single one of those defects. I'll inspect, walls and ceilings where every nail and screw is popped. And we all know the reasons why that happens. But the client's expectation is that the new house not have this dimpled wall finish. I'm not going to put a piece of tape on every nail head or screw. I'm going to put two or three, but my report is going to say, hey, I identified this deficiency on this wall, but the contractor should look at the whole wall because this same thing is repeated in multiple areas. Main reason I do that is the contractor that is going to come behind me and fix this item, his attitude towards fixing or her attitude towards fixing the item is going to diminish with each piece of tape. So sometimes my clients get their hands on the blue tape, which can be unfortunate, and they start going nuts with it. And I'll try and instruct them that, you really want to give them an idea of what it is that you want fixed. If there's something that's really specific, mark that, but don't mark every single item. We want to just bring it to their attention. I think home inspectors need to be educated on smart home technology, even though a lot of it is low voltage or things that you could disclaim as not being your responsibility. Your client is going to want to know where to go, at least to learn how to operate the house. So you want to identify the type of equipment that's in place, provide some links or manuals of where they could go to figure out more, who to contact to reprogram them, how they could reprogram them. Similarly, I'll operate sound systems. I'll either try and connect via Bluetooth and play music to demonstrate that the speakers work. Often clients will be like, well, do the speakers work? And the only way to tell is to try and test them out. Obviously, if there's no powered amplifier system, if there's no sort of home control for it, you're not going to be able to do that. But if you have the ability, it is helpful to do that. I think you should be testing generators. You should be inspecting them at the very least. You should look for service stickers. It's a small engine. It has a battery. It has spark plugs. It has oil. It has a filter. And those things are all fairly readily visible. I will often simulate a power outage by dropping out the main breaker and seeing if the system turns on. I will have evaluated the house prior to that to determine whether or not turning the power off is actually going to be a bigger issue. If there's systems in place that may not reset or may need my help in resetting, I may not turn those off. But power does drop occasionally, and that's why people have generators. And they'll want to know what circuits it's running, how much of the house it covers. They definitely need to know that it needs to be serviced annually. They're sometimes surprised to learn that generators exercise, and then if the exercise setting gets off time, it can exercise at an inconvenient time. A lot of houses in our area have lightning rod systems. I'm going to evaluate the lightning rod when I'm on the roof, and I'm going to find where the path is. I'm not going to determine that it's functional. I'm just going to report that it's present and that the client should know that they have a lightning rod system because they can get a benefit on their homeowner's insurance if they have that. But I'm also going to inspect its condition. If there's an obvious break, if there's rods that have fallen or gotten loose. If it needs some maintenance, it's going to go in my roof section. I think home inspectors should also be inspecting elevators. I've purchased a set of elevator keys, and I have a bunch of different ones that I don't use often. But there's two or three that I keep in my tool pouch so that I have them at the ready. There's often an elevator key in the house. You want to demonstrate to the client how to open the elevator if someone gets stuck. You want to open it when the car is above the lowest level so you can look at the pit. I've found pits full of water that nobody knew was there because nobody had opened it up and taken a look. You also want to open it at the upper end so you can check the top of the car and whatever sort of mechanisms it has to drive. There are some pneumatic systems out there that'll have a hydraulic fluid that can leak. And so that's something you would want to look for. And I charge more for inspecting an elevator. Houses that have saunas, you should turn the sauna on, make sure it functions. Wood destroying insects, I don't do a wood destroying insect inspection, but I will often substitute that out and include that information in my report. People will wonder, well, who carries the liability there? In the end, the wood destroying inspector is carrying that liability. But I have such confidence in him and in my own work that I'm not worried about that as an issue. When we inspect condos and co-ops, we're not required to inspect the common area elements. You definitely need to think about that, especially in some of these renovated townhouses where they've taken a house and turned it into 3 or 4 uh, units and created a new condo association. Um, my experience is that if you're not looking at the roof or the exterior or things that affect the association globally, um, those are things that your client's going to need to know. If that building is going to need a new roof soon, and that's an association issue, they should know, hey, there's going to be a new roof needed, and you should ask if there's enough money to cover the roof. Is there going to be an assessment? Um, in larger buildings, obviously, you may not be looking at that. But as much information that you can provide to your client will definitely be helpful. Other items that I talked about earlier, like interior and exterior lighting circuits, I want to make sure my clients know how the floodlights work, which switches do what, where the timers are, which lights do what inside the house. Homes that have water treatment systems, I'm going to evaluate and tell them what they have, what sort of media, what sort of softener, UV light, and I'll try and provide the information of who most recently serviced it or installed it so that they have that contact information at the ready. Concealed things like hydronic heating and electric floor heating, I'm going to use my infrared camera to make sure that those systems are functioning. I'm going to try and determine the coverage that they have. Septic systems, if I've been informed ahead of time and the client wants to do a full evaluation, we'll coordinate with the septic contractor to have them come out, pump the tank, and give them the certificate that they need. If we get there and all of a sudden they just say, oh, yeah, there's a septic, I'm going to try and locate the tank. I'm going to try and pop the lid off, stick my camera down in there, and just get a sense of the condition of the baffles and an idea of where the infiltration field is, because visually you can get some idea of how it's functioning. The information that's out there will tell you that a septic system is going to last for 30 years. Most of the time when we find a septic system, it's considerably older than that and still functioning. But when it's failing, there are definitely some signs, and you want to be able to include that information in your report. Aquatic features like fish ponds, fountains, larger ponds, small lakes, that type of thing, when they have aerators, all also information that your client needs to know something about. Any of these things that I just went over, if you're disclaiming them and saying it's not me, I'm not inspecting it, I'm not providing you any information, the client needs a source for that information. And yes, the source can be the homeowner, but sometimes that information is limited, and sometimes the client is suspicious of it. So I'm not suggesting that you provide all the information about all these different items, but you want to be able to provide that information to the client in such a way that they can continue to make an informed decision, have a sense of what it is they're getting, what they're not getting, the condition of those things. Who needs a technically exhaustive inspection? Every home buyer. Uh, Even on a smaller house, I will try and provide as much information as I can. So any of those things that are in a house that I covered earlier, I'm going to make sure that the buyer, my client, knows this is how you operate the house. These are where these things are located. And I'm going to include pictures and descriptions in my report, how to turn things on, how to turn things off, how to figure out what that light does. Larger estates, and I'm lucky enough to do quite a bit of this type of work, um, definitely need sort of a roadmap of what it is that they have. And the only way to do that is to try and be technically exhaustive, to essentially figure out the house. Complex homes with multiple systems and different operating systems, smart home stuff needs a technically exhaustive inspection. Properties that have multiple dwellings need a technically exhaustive inspection. People that are remote owners, people that own the property but are not there, need to know what they have. And then property managers, people that are actually going to do the work, need a technically exhaustive inspection so that they essentially get a sense of what it is that they're taking on without having to learn it first. They at least get a roadmap. So you may wonder, how can I provide technically exhaustive inspections? This is what I do. I built a new house in 2007, and my roofing contractor has been a good friend of mine since he did that work. And he will often come out and help me on roof inspections. Um, and then because he's really good at what he does, he actually looks at a lot of stuff. So on a larger property, I'll have him come and he'll do the roof. He'll do the interior, take a look at it, do the roof, look at where the downspouts are going, do the stormwater system, and also look at the exterior. And then he and I will walk it together. He'll point out what he has observed, and I'll incorporate that information into my contract, into my report. Similarly, when a client calls and says, "Do you do pest inspections?" Our first answer is no, we don't. And then they'll say, "Well, do you have somebody you can recommend?" And we'll say, "Well, yeah, we can have our guy be there at the same time." Um, for a long time, I didn't upcharge his. I just did a direct pass through. You pay him. We're just scheduling it. Now I think we actually run it through our part of it. Um, for the longest time, when I would have a property with pools, I would call this guy Chip Nowak, who was the owner of Pool Service Company in Arlington. And then when he sold it maybe 15 years ago, he started just doing pool inspections. And so I would have Chip come inspect the pool. He would write his report, and then I would transcribe his report into my report and include my pictures. And I did that with Chip enough that I essentially learned how to inspect the pools from him. If you decide to use to do pool inspections, you can use the ASHI pool standards. Um, Doing pools is helpful if and again, this is the market I'm in, that we frequently have pools. We can inspect pools that have been winterized. We can inspect pools that haven't been operated in years. We can inspect pools that are open and running. We charge, I want to say like $550 to $750, depending on the style of pool. We add that onto our inspection fee. Similarly, radon reduction systems, and we have a lot of those in our areas. You shouldn't be disclaiming them and saying, "I'm not looking at that. I can't do anything for you regarding that." And I'm not suggesting that you're going to say, "Oh, the radon system is working," but you can say it's operating, and you can determine if it has the components that it needs. It needs the manometer. The manometer should be offset. It needs to be labeled. The crock or flooring that it goes into needs to be sealed. The fan needs to be vertically oriented. It can't be under or below conditioned or habitable space. So it either needs to be on the exterior, in the attic, or on the roof. It needs to have a switch. It needs to have a dedicated breaker that's labeled. There's lots of things that you can inform your client about, like this radon system was professionally installed and appears to be operating the way it should. But the only way to test is to test. And so you can sell them a radon test as well. But you shouldn't be saying, "Oh, radon system, not my job," because it's just another thing that the client is going to need to know about their house. And if you're not providing that information, they need to get it from somewhere. I will often hire some home inspectors as subcontractors for the day. So when I have large properties that I'm doing, I'll have one or two additional inspectors. One is a retired inspector who really likes inspecting but got tired of writing reports. And so he comes out and is really helpful with me on the inspections. When I get into really large properties, I'll actually bring out a couple of more people. They tend to be people from uh, MAC ASHI and from the board. I'm recommending that you learn how to test and when not to test a generator, and there's lots of online information about that. I recommend you learn how to test and when not to test an irrigation system, and similarly, there's a lot of information on that. And then you should also learn how to inspect an elevator. For each of those things, you can upcharge individually or build that into your fee, but it helps expand your profitability. It also helps broaden your reach. So you'll get more referrals because you're providing more information. You're making the real estate agent or the homeowner have to look for things, not have to look for things elsewhere. They can get it in sort of one-stop shop.
One thing that probably everybody ought to have in their inspection contract is a little line that says all parties understand and agree that the following items were specifically excluded from this inspection and were not inspected. And then you can, if you do get across, if you do come across one of those systems that you were describing that is you do feel uncomfortable with and you really don't want to do it, you have a place to stick it in your report where you're gonna be completely protected. You know what I mean?
Yep, that's a good recommendation. And that's similar to what I describe is that I'm
Yeah.
essentially going to disclaim most of those things. And then individually, I'm going to say, and oh, by the way, I'm giving you this information. And I recognize that I'm opening myself up because I did that for one and I didn't do it for all. I'm not that worried about that.